The flight was smooth until suddenly everything turned into chaos. Moments earlier, passengers were enjoying the calm blue sky outside their windows, sipping drinks, reading books, or drifting into quiet naps. The cabin lights glowed softly, the engines hummed with steady confidence, and nothing hinted at the disaster waiting ahead. Then, without warning, a violent jolt rippled through the aircraft. It wasn't the kind of turbulence people laughed off. This was different, sharp, sudden, terrifying. Drinks spilled, the overhead compartments rattled, and several passengers grabbed their armrests instinctively. Before anyone could process what was happening, the plane dipped sharply and alarms erupted from the cockpit like sirens announcing the end of the world. In the very next heartbeat, oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a mechanical snap, bouncing wildly in front of shocked passengers. Screams filled the cabin. Mothers clutched their children, elderly passengers cried out in confusion, and flight attendants struggled to keep their balance as the aircraft shook again. In the middle of the chaos, the intercom remained silent. No reassuring captain's voice. No instructions. No explanation. Just the blaring alarms and panicked breathing of 211 souls trapped at 35,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, both pilots were slumped over the controls, unconscious. Their hands hung lifelessly at their sides, and the plane flew dangerously off course. Red warning lights flashed across the instrument panels. The autopilot had disengaged. Altitude was dropping. Air pressure was unstable. The aircraft's nose was tilting downward. And out in the cabin, no one knew that the people responsible for flying the plane were no longer capable of saving it. Among the passengers sat an 18-year-old girl, quiet and unnoticed until now. She had boarded the plane like everyone else, blending into the crowd with her simple clothes and backpack. She wasn't a professional pilot. She wasn't an expert. She wasn't trained for emergencies like this. In fact, she had only flown small training aircraft, lightweight, two-seater planes used by student pilots. She had practiced takeoffs, landings, and basic controls, always with an instructor by her side. Never alone. And certainly never in a huge commercial passenger jet carrying more than 200 people. But as the jet shook again, harder this time, she felt something shift inside her. A sense of responsibility. A spark of courage. An instinct telling her she could not sit still and watch everyone die. Her heart pounded against her ribs, so loudly she could almost hear it over the alarms. Fear clawed at the edges of her mind, whispering that she wasn't capable, that she was too young, too inexperienced, too unprepared. But another voice inside her, a stronger one, said that she had to try. Because no one else could. No one else would. She unbuckled her seatbelt with trembling hands and stood up, steadying herself as the plane lurched again. A flight attendant noticed her and tried to shout something, but the girl moved forward with determination. She pushed past panicked passengers, squeezing between shaking arms and flailing masks. Every step toward the cockpit felt like walking through a storm. She could feel eyes on her, confused, desperate, hopeful. Someone asked where she was going. Someone else pleaded for help. But she kept moving, driven by a force she didn't fully understand. When she reached the cockpit door, she found it already unlocked, hanging slightly open from the violent movements of the plane. She stepped inside and froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight before her. The two pilots lay motionless, their heads slumped forward, the control yoke jerking unpredictably as the aircraft drifted out of balance. Screens flashed warnings she had never seen before. Altitude decreasing. Stall notices. Autopilot failure. The jet's engines strained with uneven power. It was a nightmare brought to life. Her breath shook in her chest, but she forced herself to move. She grabbed the captain's arm and shook him desperately, trying to wake him. No response. She tried the first officer. Still nothing. The reality hit her with a cold, crushing weight. They weren't waking up anytime soon. Whether it was a sudden medical emergency, decompression, or something else, both pilots were out of the fight. The plane was alone, and so was she. Her hands trembled as she slid into the pilot's seat. The leather felt too big, too heavy, too real. This wasn't a simulator. This wasn't a training session. This was life or death. She swallowed hard, trying to recall everything she had learned during her training sessions back home. Airspeed, altitude, attitude indicator, stabilizer trim. She forced herself to breathe deeply, pushing back the fear that threatened to consume her. She grabbed the controls, and the weight of the aircraft's resistance shocked her. This wasn't like the light planes she was used to. This jet was massive, and every movement felt slower, heavier, and more dangerous. The nose was dipping, slowly but steadily. If she didn't act soon, the plane could enter a steep descent it would not recover from. Her voice shook as she pressed the radio button and tried to contact air traffic control. She had never spoken to them alone, not without an instructor guiding her, yet now she had no choice. After a moment of static, a voice crackled through the speakers, confused and tense. They asked who she was. She hesitated before answering, her voice barely stable. She told them she was 18. She told them she had flying experience. She told them both pilots were unconscious. She told them she was taking control. There was silence on the other end. Disbelief, shock, fear. But then came instructions, slow, steady, detailed instructions from professionals on the ground who knew exactly what was at stake. They guided her step by step, monitoring the aircraft's flight path, and trying to keep her calm. They couldn't take control of the plane. They couldn't fly it for her. But they could help her survive. Sweat gathered on her forehead. Her hands gripped the controls tightly. Every muscle in her body trembled as she stabilized the plane, fighting the heavy resistance of the jet. She adjusted the throttle gently, almost afraid to touch it, but she followed the instructions exactly. Gradually, the aircraft leveled out, and the terrifying descent slowed. Passengers felt the change. Screams turned into shaky breaths. Panic softened into weak hope. No one knew exactly what was happening in the cockpit, but they felt the aircraft steady, and for a moment, the cabin filled with a fragile sense of relief. But the danger was far from over. The jet was still too high, too fast, and approaching airspace it wasn't supposed to be in. The girl wiped her palms on her jeans and focused on the horizon. Her breathing steadied. Her heartbeat slowed. She felt the weight of every life on board pressing onto her shoulders, yet, somehow, it gave her strength instead of fear. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't ready for this. But she was here, and she was the only hope they had. Shaking but determined, she entered the cockpit. Her entire body felt as if it were vibrating from fear, adrenaline, and the violent turbulence tossing the aircraft around like a helpless toy in the sky. The cockpit door slammed against the wall behind her as the plane lurched again, the force nearly knocking her off her feet. She caught herself on the side panel and gasped, staring at the horrifying scene before her. The pilots were still unconscious, still motionless, still offering no control and no guidance. But she didn't have time to panic again. Time was tearing away second by second, and the jet was descending with a dangerous tilt. If she didn't act now, the plane might enter a spiral dive it could never recover from. Alarms blared from every direction, shrill and angry, echoing off the cramped space and shaking her nerves even more. Red warning lights flashed across every panel, overheating indicators, altitude alerts, autopilot disconnect signals, stall warnings she couldn't ignore. It felt like standing inside a machine on the edge of total collapse. Screens flickered with flight data she barely recognized, numbers rising and falling too fast for her to track. The aircraft trembled violently again, and she instinctively grabbed the back of the captain's chair to stop herself from losing balance. Her breathing was fast and uneven, but she forced herself forward, sliding into the pilot's seat with trembling legs. The leather felt cold against her palms, and the control yoke seemed impossibly heavy. She had sat in one like this before, but never here, never in a real commercial jet, never with 211 lives depending entirely on her. She reached out, her hands shaking uncontrollably at first. She closed her eyes for 1 second, forcing herself to breathe, to focus, to remember the lessons she had learned. Airplanes respond best to calm pilots. Control comes from steady hands. Fear destroys judgment. She repeated those words to herself like a prayer and opened her eyes. She grabbed the controls. The plane tilted sharply as if resisting her, pulled by gravity and turbulence. She fought against it with both hands, her arms straining as she tried to steady the aircraft. It felt nothing like the small trainer planes she had flown. Those were light, responsive, almost graceful. This jet was massive, stubborn, heavy, and dangerously unstable in the air. It didn't respond instantly. It didn't forgive mistakes. Every tiny adjustment required strength and precision, and she had neither experience nor the luxury of time. But she had something else. She had determination. Her breath caught in her throat as the aircraft dipped again. Warning alarms screamed louder, and she could feel the cabin behind her react with renewed panic. Shouts, cries, the unmistakable sound of fear spreading through the passengers. She couldn't let that distract her. She tightened her grip, held the yoke firm, and made a slow correction just like she had practiced hundreds of times in training. One movement at a time. No sudden pulls. No panic. Just control. The jet steadied slightly, but only slightly. The turbulence outside punched the wings like invisible fists, and the nose still pointed downward at an angle too steep to continue for long. She needed help. She needed someone who knew this aircraft better than she did. She reached for the radio, her fingers slipping over the buttons. Static crackled through the speakers at first, then a faint, confused voice responded. She pressed the transmit button and tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She swallowed, inhaled shakily, and tried again. This is passenger. 18 years old. Both pilots are unconscious. I've taken control of the aircraft. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that carried disbelief, shock, and fear. She imagined the air traffic controllers staring at each other, wondering if this was a mistake, a prank, or a nightmare. But she didn't have time for their hesitation. I'm taking control, she repeated, louder this time, stronger, steadier. Her voice surprised even herself. The fear was still inside her, burning hot, but something else was forming beneath it, a core of determination she didn't realize she had. Finally, the voice returned, this time urgent and serious. He asked her to confirm the situation. Asked if the pilots were breathing. Asked if she had any flight experience at all. She answered as quickly as she could, her voice shaking but honest. Yes, the pilots were unresponsive. Yes, she had flight experience. No, she had never flown a commercial jet. But she wasn't giving up. Air traffic control sprang into action. She could hear it in their tone, the rapid shift from confusion to focused precision. They asked her for the plane's altitude. She looked at the instrument panel, blinking past the warning lights to read the numbers. Her voice trembled as she relayed the information. They asked about airspeed. She checked that too. They asked about the plane's current heading. She forced herself to interpret the display despite the panic clouding her thoughts. The controller spoke calmly, guiding her step by step, telling her to pull the yoke gently to stabilize the descent. She did exactly what he said. The jet responded gradually, the nose lifting a few degrees. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't stable. But it was better than before. She felt a small surge of relief, but the alarms kept sounding, reminding her that survival was far from guaranteed. Her arms burned from the effort. Sweat formed across her forehead and trickled down her temple. She wiped it away with the back of her hand without releasing her grip on the controls. The cockpit shook again as the plane hit another pocket of violent air. The windows rattled. The engines groaned. The pressure in the room felt suffocating, but she kept her focus. The controller told her to adjust the throttle slightly. She moved her hand slowly, carefully, terrified of making a mistake. The engines responded with a deep roar. The plane leveled a little more, enough for passengers to notice. A brief hush fell over the cabin. They didn't know who was flying. They didn't know what was happening. But they could feel that someone, somehow, was fighting to keep them alive. She continued to follow every instruction. Her breathing steadied. Her hands, though trembling, were beginning to move with more confidence. Not because she wasn't scared, she was terrified, but because she knew she didn't have another option. Quitting was not possible. Giving up meant death. And she refused to let that happen. Minutes felt like hours. The alarms didn't stop. The flashing lights didn't fade. But her focus sharpened. She began to anticipate the turbulence, correcting for it faster each time. She scanned the instruments more carefully. She recognized patterns she had learned during training. She felt, for a moment, like she belonged in the pilot's seat, even though she knew the situation was far beyond what any student should ever face. Air traffic control instructed her to prepare for descent into safer altitude. The jet was still higher than ideal and needed to be positioned for an emergency landing. She acknowledged their instructions, her voice now stronger, steadier. She followed every step, even when fear clawed at her chest. The controller on the other end took a moment to say something unexpected. Something she didn't know she needed to hear. "You're doing good," he told her. "You're doing really good. Keep going." She blinked hard, swallowing the sudden wave of emotion that hit her. No one had ever told her she could do something like this. No one had prepared her for this exact moment. But now she felt it, somewhere deep within her, that she could do this. Not perfectly, not confidently, but bravely. She tightened her grip on the controls. The plane, though still shaking, responded to her like it trusted her. She felt a strange sense of partnership with the machine. It wasn't fighting her as violently now. It was holding on. She whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else, "I've got you. I've got all of you." And with that, she committed fully to saving 211 lives. The fear was still there, but for the first time, courage was stronger. As the runway appeared through the thick, swirling clouds, she felt her breath catch in her throat. For almost an hour, she had been fighting the sky, the storm, the weight of a machine far bigger than anything she had ever flown. Her arms ached, her hands were stiff around the controls, and her face was pale with exhaustion. But now, finally, the runway was there. A straight line of hope, glowing faintly through the mist. It didn't look like just a piece of asphalt anymore. It looked like salvation. She swallowed hard, unable to tear her eyes away from that faint strip of solid ground. She had practiced landings before, many times in training. But those were gentle, predictable approaches in small aircraft on sunny days. Not a massive commercial jet. Not in a storm. Not with alarms still chiming behind her, and certainly not with 211 frightened passengers praying silently for a miracle. Every breath she took felt like part of a countdown, one breath closer to life, or one breath closer to disaster. Air traffic control kept talking to her through the headset. Their voices were steady, calm, guiding her step by step as if they feared one wrong word would shatter her focus. They told her to adjust her altitude. They told her she was drifting slightly left. They told her to ease the throttle, lower the flaps, prepare for descent. She followed each instruction slowly, carefully, terrified of doing something too quickly. Her hands moved with trembling precision. She exhaled deliberately, trying to steady her heartbeat. Passengers in the cabin had gone strangely quiet. The earlier panic had faded into a tense silence, the kind that fills a room when everyone is waiting for fate to reveal its decision. Some clutched their armrests until their knuckles turned white. Others held hands with strangers, united by fear. Mothers pressed their children close, whispering soft prayers. Elderly passengers stared ahead with wet eyes. Everyone knew they were close to the ground. Everyone felt the plane descending. They could sense it in the way gravity pressed their bodies gently forward, in the faint rumble under their feet, in the eerie silence of people holding their breath. And they all wondered the same thing: who was flying the plane? Who was their unseen savior? The girl didn't think about the passengers behind her. She wanted to, but she couldn't afford to. Her world had shrunk into a small tunnel with only one focus, the runway growing larger through the cockpit window. She aligned the nose of the aircraft carefully. The wings wobbled in the wind, and she corrected them instantly. She touched the throttle with just enough pressure to lower the speed without losing control. Every adjustment was a delicate dance between fear and instinct, courage and calculation. Thick clouds still surrounded the aircraft, muffling the outside world. Lights flickered through the mist, runway markers blinking like stars guiding her down. The weather made everything harder, visibility was low, the crosswinds unpredictable, and the descent angle delicate. Her voice shook as she spoke into the radio. "I see the runway," she whispered. "Good," the controller said softly. "You're doing great. Stay steady. You're almost there. Almost there." 2 words that made her chest tighten. She forced herself to inhale again, feeling the oxygen fill her lungs slowly. She reminded herself not to rush, not to let fear push her into a mistake. She had come too far to lose control now. The aircraft dipped slightly. She corrected. It drifted right. She corrected again. The storm kept trying to push the jet off course, but she fought back, inch by inch, breath by breath. The wheels strained beneath the plane, vibrating with the increasing nearness of the ground. The engines growled, the wind slapped against the fuselage, and everything felt like it could fall apart with one wrong move. But she held firm. Her arms shook violently, but she kept them steady. She whispered to herself without thinking, small words, fragments of courage. "Easy, easy, keep it level, you can do this." At 500 feet, the runway was fully visible. Lights stretched out like a glowing path beneath her, leading her home. Her heart hammered so loud she thought it might drown out the radio entirely. She eased back on the throttle again. The speed dropped, the plane descending smoothly now, almost gracefully. Air traffic control went silent for a moment, giving her the space to concentrate during the most critical seconds of the entire flight. The cabin behind her felt frozen in time. Everyone sensed the ground rushing up beneath them. Everyone held on to something, hope, fear, faith, anything. Parents closed their eyes. Some whispered prayers. Some stared forward, refusing to look away. A little boy whispered to his mother, asking if they would live. She held him tighter, tears slipping down her cheeks, and whispered that they would. Inside the cockpit, the girl focused so intensely that she no longer heard the alarms, no longer noticed the flashing lights. All she saw was the runway. All she felt was the motion of the plane. She adjusted the wings one last time, lined the aircraft up perfectly, and began the final descent. Her breathing slowed. Her hands steadied. Her mind grew quiet. At 100 feet, the ground details sharpened. She felt the wheels inch closer. The jet glided over the approach lights, the engines humming low and deep like a heartbeat. She pulled the yoke gently, bringing the nose up just enough. At 50 feet, the world seemed to pause. At 20 feet, she whispered, "Please." Then, touchdown. The left wheel hit the runway first, kissing the ground with a heavy jolt. The right wheel followed half a second later, slamming down with another burst of force. The plane shook violently, but she held on, fighting to keep it centered. The nose gear dropped next, the final anchor pulling the aircraft fully onto solid earth. For one long moment, there was only silence. Utter silence. No screams. No applause. Not even breathing. Just the deafening sound of 211 people realizing they were alive. Then, slowly, like a wave spreading from the front to the back, applause erupted. First soft, then louder, then thunderous. Crying, laughing, cheering. The entire cabin exploded with emotion. People hugged strangers, sobbed into their hands, clapped until their palms stung. A mother kissed her child's forehead. A man pressed his forehead to the window, crying silently. Flight attendants collapsed into their seats with relief. In the cockpit, the girl felt her body go limp. The emotions she had been holding back crashed into her all at once: relief, disbelief, exhaustion so deep it made her eyes blur. She let out a shaking breath she didn't realize she had been holding for minutes. Her hands slowly loosened their grip on the controls. Her arms trembled from the strain, her heart pounding against her ribs as tears filled her eyes. She had done it. She had landed a passenger jet. She had saved every single person on board. Air traffic control filled her headset again, this time with voices thick with awe. They congratulated her. They praised her. They told her she had accomplished something that even experienced pilots struggled with. They told her she was a hero. But she didn't feel like one. Not yet. She felt like a girl who had done what she needed to do, what no one else could. She reached up with a shaky hand and wiped away her tears, letting out a tiny, exhausted laugh. As rescue crews surrounded the aircraft and passengers flooded out with tears and gratitude. Word spread quickly. An 18-year-old girl had landed the plane. An 18-year-old had saved 211 lives. An 18-year-old had done the impossible. She stepped out of the cockpit eventually, timid and overwhelmed, and was met with applause louder than anything she had ever heard. People reached out to touch her hand, thank her, bless her. The world outside would soon know her name. News cameras would come. Headlines would spread globally. She would become a symbol of courage, of calm under pressure, of impossible bravery. But in that moment, she was just a girl who had fought fear with strength she never knew she had. A girl who refused to give up. A girl who became a hero the world would never forget.